Hello, 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 everyone. I hope y'all are having an okay morning. Hello, 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 hello. If you can see and or hear me, please do give me some sort of indication, just so I am sure we are on the same of pages. That looks like a yes. Okay. So yeah, I do apologize that poor Talea, man. Poor Talea getting another delay in the system. As I think most of y'all will have heard, Andy had to do an emergency travel for family emergency, which is not great. So if you are the religious sort, I would ask that you keep the laws in your prayers, and if not, then keep them in your thoughts, because they're just, man, they're having a year, man. They are having a rough year over there. But for here, the show must go on. So I hope you're all doing well yourselves. We're going to just kind of do a bit of a Q&A, kind of as we do, or Andy tends to do when I'm not here for whatever reason. So yeah, man, yeah. In retrospect, I feel sometimes it might have been a dangerous kind of ambitious to place the main Lorebeard show as a Sunday, because Sunday's kind of like, if shit hits the fan, Sunday is sort of like your number one recovery day, or like if something happens, it's the day that you gotta go take care of something, because that's when everyone else is that's when everyone else is like in your life will be available and all this stuff. And of course, yes, happy Father's Day to those of you in America as well, which, I mean, that's something I've got going on today, but that's waiting until after Lorebeards. But yeah, so today we're just gonna hang out and kind of just chat and ramble for a bit. This isn't going to be like the full 3 hours. We'll probably go for maybe an hour and a half, just so long as questions keep coming in, then I'll stick around to keep answering them. So yeah, with that, let's kind of just get into what y'all have got in your minds. Feel free to ask about anything. It doesn't have to be about Warhammer. It could be about Total War. It could be about media stuff that I've been up to or watching or whatever. It could be about Age of Sigmar or 40k or video games or whatever. Grim Isaac, best wishes for Andy's mom. Yes, hopefully it ends well and he can return happily soon. That would be very, very nice. That would be quite nice. Scary thing about getting older, man, is that as you get older, your parents get older, and all of a sudden your parents get like notably older. And that is always very spooky. Singemeister, all the best with the laws. What units are most thematic for a Mannfred von Carstein Total War playthrough? Example: zombies for Gorst, spirits for Kimmler. I've always found spirits for Kimmler to be kind of a funny one. As Kimmler's always been almost more of a, I've always considered Kimmler to be more of like a Graveguard specific character, like Graveguard. There's a story about him having like a Terrorgeist and then having like a big mixture of like, countless legions reinforced by spirits. But Total War was like, he has to specialize in something. So they specialized him in spirits. Mannfred von Carstein, to put it very bluntly, is Karl Franz of the Grease's gold tooth of the vampire counts. So he's kind of like main character syndrome. And what I mean by that is Mannfred is very, very famous / infamous for being the one that went out into the world and gathered up all of the various bits and pieces of the different vampire bloodlines and their specialities and brought them together under one umbrella. So Mannfred is rather unique in that he doesn't really have like a singular unit that he specs into, but instead he is more of like the overall generalist, like bad guy, because he went so out of his way to court the Lamians and reforge the alliance that Conrad had built with the Blood Dragons, and he lured in elements, as many elements as he could of the Strigoi, and he bargained with the Necrarchs so that he was able to gather all of this power under a single authority. So he really allows you to run with anything. But what I will say is that Mannfred does very much follow in his father's footsteps about how to build his own personal army that he wages war with, in the sense that Mannfred is noted to have a bit of an old-fashioned taste as far as vampire counts are concerned. The vampire counts of Sylvania are concerned. And he's not identical to Vlad, because Vlad liked having living components of his armies. Mannfred doesn't. Mannfred does not care for the living at all in the slightest. He doesn't follow his father's philosophy nearly as much when it comes to, the whole serving me in life part. So what I would say with Mannfred is that he likes having an elite army that is based around him, that is sustained by incredibly powerful necromantic powers. So you would likely be seeing things running around like lots of Grey Guard, Black Knights, at least one unit of Blood Knights, all of your big monsters. So the Terrorgeist, the Vargulf, Vargeist especially. Mannfred was a fairly big player in the creation of the Vargeists, which are vampires that were deemed to be threats or failures. So they were captured and imprisoned within coffins beneath Castle Drakenfels, where warpstone infused or warpstone laced water drips onto their coffins, and they go insane and turn into like horrible, gribbly monsters. So in that sense, I would say very much that you are and to put some music on my background because um that's kind of argue with. But with Mannfred, he's one of the genuinely, in my opinion, that I would say you can build him however you want, and he's perfect. If you want to stick to his older lore, the most advanced mount that he ends up riding is the Barded Nightmare, but he got expanded up to a zombie dragon in 8th edition, so it's totally canonical for him to ride a zombie dragon. So you can do that as well. Grim Isaac, hopefully everything is good for Mumsy and he's home by July, as I plan to have the 7th off. What would happen if Nehekara revived in its entirety? Okay, so Grim Isaac, I'm going to assume you mean what if they all awoke as opposed to like came back to life. I assume you mean they're like still Tomb Kings. So in my opinion, this would be an end time scenario. This would be a cataclysm waiting to happen, because granted, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing for the rest of the world, but it would be a very bad thing for anyone adjacent or nearby. It would be really rough, because basically you would have a nation that stood for I think Nehekara was up and running for at least, I want to say what, 3,000 years? I'd have to double check, but like longer than like our like longer than a lot of things in our world. And every single person, nearly every single person that died in that entire time was preserved in some fashion, either very minorly or very expertly, in a way that would allow them to be. Oh, you mean full on back to life? Oh, honestly, if all of Nehekara just like randomly sprouted back to life right now, well, okay, the, something really bizarre would have had to go down to reverse all of that death, and the land itself would need to be purified and immediately resurrected. Otherwise, they would all come back to life, and in the harsh conditions of the Nehekar, the land of the dead, they would all just immediately die again. If the land revived alongside them, they would still be in an absolutely massive crisis because there would be way too many people, and there would be no systems in place to feed these people or to house them or to clothe them. Like, it would kind of be a giant nightmare. Pretty much no matter how much life you gave them, you would be looking at mass death on a horrific scale. Nehekara would like wake up and probably vanish almost overnight. There would probably be enough survivors that the old cities would be able to get their feet under them and maybe start to rebuild, but it would be really, 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 really bad for a while. And for that much magic to go off in one area, there would have to have been like a unparalleled storm of magic or ritual or something insane happened. So you would probably also have the area swarming with like demons, and it would turn into a hellhole. I mean, the simplest answer is it would turn into a massive hellhole. In order for something like that to happen, the Tomb Kings would need to be in on it, and they would need like centuries of planning and preparation. Otherwise, the vast majority of people that you just resurrect are all just going to die. Joe Numbers, good morning from work, Ryan. Hopefully, Mrs. Law staves off whatever's going on. How would you fit the Hobgoblin Khanate into Age of Sigmar? I would evolve the. I would take the Gitmob Grots and evolve them to have an upper echelon of Hobgrots. So, if I was going to use Hobgoblins, more than likely I wouldn't use Hobgoblins. I would probably create a new type of goblin, so that I would make it where you basically have your like the Gitmob Grots have like an upper echelon of Grots that are uniquely powerful. Like they're far more muscular, lean, and strong compared to regular goblins, or regular Grots, because the Hobgrots have been, which are the Hobgoblins essentially, have already been sort of reinvented for the Hellsmiths of Hashut, but they're not as big and powerful as I think genuine Hobgoblins would be from fantasy. Like they're more gangly, and kind of like these few little pot-bellied guys, as opposed to the almost orc-sized, terrifying warriors that reigned in the Hobgoblin Khanate. But I would basically take the Gitmob Grots and ascend them into being like a fully functional army or sub-faction. And I would mostly have them roaming the plains of Hish, to give like a notable greenskin faction over in the realm of light. I would also have them roaming the valleys and the shadow plains of Ulgu. So I think I would make them primarily massive um, of groups within those locations, and of course they would be all over the 8 realms. But I think those would be the 2 realms where they would be the most prevalent, and you would basically have your. I would take the Get Mob lore that we already have, where we have like the Sun Chasers. So there's this whole group of wolf riding grots that follow that either pursue the sun or they acknowledge the sun as like a notable um, force within their own lore. And I think I would try and take some elements of the story of the wolves that devour the moon and sun from Norse mythology, and I would mix it up and try and create something kind of fun out of that. And basically have a series of wolf tribes that roam around Hish and Olgu in like a cyclical form that pursue like lunar bodies, um, and have all sorts of crazy stuff going on. That's probably what I would do. Brock, thank you so much for 6 months. What's your favorite Warhammer Fantasy RPG? Thank you. Um, hmm, my favorite Warhammer Fantasy RPG it would definitely be a Lizardman RPG. It's probably here. I'll pull them up. It'd either be this one or this one, I think. It's probably this one. So, let me share screen. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it that well. But this piece, it's a little small on the screen, but this was a piece of art that was released in the. Ooh, gosh. I can't remember if we got a black and white version in 7th or if this was only released in 8 as a color print. Um, it's a little small, but this was one of the first pieces of art we ever got depicting the cataclysm. And it's this beautiful art that shows like Saurus fighting the uh, demons of chaos in Lustria, and then you have this epic battle of a Lord of Change going up against a Spawn in the background. And I love this piece. Uh, Audio is really choppy. That's not good. Is it still choppy? Shouldn't be choppy. I'm not seeing any connection issues. Huh. Audio's acting weird. Is it still weird or has it settled? It goes choppy for a bit. Let me move my phone away. That's the only thing I can think is maybe my phone's pissing it off. Weird bump sounds good again. Okay. Odd. It wasn't on YouTube. Huh. Or it wasn't on Twitch. It was only on YouTube. That's super weird. Okay. Twitch, y'all didn't hear anything weird at all? That's super weird if it's only on YouTube. Okay. Well, sounds like if that's the case, then there's nothing I can do about it. Odd. Okay. Sir Million Bloodweaver, sending support vibes to Andy and his family, never easy dealing with health and age, especially nowadays. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Brock 6000. I think the song Boneless single version by Steve Aoki would make a great Lizardman song. Slow build to a rhythm bass deep with synth. Like army slowly marching through the jungle with bizarre old one tech thumping. I can actually look that up and listen to it because I'm on this. which means I can listen to it without it getting into the recording and us getting in trouble. So I can listen to that while talking. Bobfoot, best wishes to Laws. How would you grow garlic? I don't think we've ever grown garlic at my place. And I don't know if that's because we can't or because we just don't need that much garlic. This is a very this is a very interesting song choice for Lizardman. I will say. Hey, yeah, I guess you could grow them here without too much issue. But it's funny that you just stick them in the ground with the pointy side up. But I probably would try and keep them in planters if I could. Sunrise. Hi Ryan, what's your opinion on the look of vampire count cities in Total War Warhammer? To me, they look way too dead, like the vampire counts rules over a graveyard instead of a functioning society. I agree. Total War very much kind of goes out of its way to try and like show super over the top expressions of the things that you're going to see, but also doing it in a way where you could see it from a super far out distance, and then as you get close, it tends to be like, oh, this is like super flanderized. For the vampire counts, I think the designs they went with work for more like a fortress, or things along those lines, as opposed to a like a city, because there's not really like there's very very few in Sylvania true cities of the dead that have that over the top. Like Castle Drakenfels, I think is reasonable to look something like that, because that was a true like city of the dead. But like Waldenhof is a full-on functioning living city nowadays, even though it does have vampires ruling over it in pseudo secrecy. So it I do agree that it takes it too far, but it's also that they created like just a handful of templates to represent a world that would be a lot more diverse than that. And it's fine. It's not great, but for what they're trying to accomplish with the tools that they're using to accomplish it, it gets the job done. Senate Overlord, what vampire bloodline would a vampire lord from Skyrim fit into in Warhammer? Also, what are your thoughts on Elder Scroll vamps in compared to Warhammer vamps? Been a while since I played Skyrim, but like you have the whole aversion to sunlight. I mean, the big thing for the vampires of Elder Scrolls is that they transform, right? When they get strong enough, they turn into the big spooky version, which is relatively unusual for Warhammer Fantasy ones, unless you're dealing with a Strigoi most of the time. That being said, You know what? Interestingly, I would say they kind of make me think a lot. Like they're vaguely von Carstein, but I actually think they might be a good representation of what the Strigoi were like pre-fall. So before the death of Ushoran and the collapsing of the Strigoi into the Ghoul Kings. So back when they were still like a very proud, powerful vampiric bloodline that were able to feed on like the rich blood of humanity instead of needing to like feed off the already dead or like beastmen and stuff like that. I would say they're actually a very good representation of like peak Strigos Strigoi. Would probably be like the best comparison. What are my thoughts on how they compare? They're fine. I don't prefer vampires that turn into like big demon dudes. I tend to prefer my vampires where they stay that mostly human form. Like, sure, their faces can get like super messed up looking. You know, when they like open their mouth and there's all the sharp teeth and they're super crazy looking. But I don't tend to be as big of a fan when they full on transform into like a big demonic villain thingamajigger. I think it's just a little too extra in my ballpark. But the Skyrim ones, they work for the game. I don't know how much their like written lore differentiates from the game, which I mean, technically it shouldn't be a lot because the games are like supposed to in many ways be the core setting. But I prefer Warhammer Fantasy Vampires, but that's because they are able to they are able to have a much more unique expression. And they're very customizable. And I really value the customization of the Warhammer Fantasy ones compared to the Elder Scroll ones. Even though the Warhammer Fantasy ones are like very hilariously, deeply inspired by the Vampire the Masquerade vampires. Gary Gronson, best wishes to the laws. By the way, have I seen the Pluribus series yet? Any faction capable of forming a hive mind / mind meld, Slaanesh Elves Greenskins. So I haven't watched the show, but I have watched a lot of clips of the show because of like YouTube shorts and stuff. And I have also watched a staggering amount of video essays about the show that I found very interesting. So I've kind of watched the show without watching the show. Is there something in Warhammer Fantasy that is capable of doing that? Yes. The sleeper, notably from Gotrek and Felix Orc Slayer, it literally does something akin to this. And it was able to affect literally everything within its zone of control. So it was able to affect dwarfs as well as greenskins, which is terrifying because dwarfs would normally, you would think, be almost impossible for something like that to work on. But the reveal is that it's not magic, so to speak. So the dwarves didn't have like a good resistance to it. I mean, they were resistant because they were very willful, but it was able to wear them down, which was incredibly tragic. When it comes to a hive mind sort of entity, I think you could argue that the Warhammer Fantasy Greenskins are capable of hive minding under really specific circumstances. I don't think it would be very likely, but the Greenskins do have a form of shared psyche, which is how they're able to know significant amount chunks of information that they normally shouldn't be able to know. And you have things like they are capable of building tech without any training. They just kind of like just know how to do it rather randomly. The whole thing with like Snotling pump wagons, which are surprisingly complex devices. And Snotlings are really, really dumb, but they're only capable of it if there's enough of them gathered into an area, or like there's enough Waaagh energy building up. And so if you wanted to, I think there could be a story about if there was a particularly powerful, like, one of the things, I'll say this, one of the things I think is relatively unexplored is Waaaghs that are led by shamans as opposed to Waaaghs that are led by war bosses. And generally you have it where, like, there are usually a Waaagh will have a prominent shaman and a prominent war boss, and the war boss is sort of like the overall figurehead, but then the shamans tend to have a significant amount of influence. We see this with like Grom the Paunch and Old Blacktooth. We also see this with the Waaagh that killed Ushoran, where it had a war boss, but the actual big bad was a Savage Orc Great Shaman. So this could be a potential story you could explore if you wanted to. I think for a rather unusual Waaagh. Maybe another thing that Warhammer Fantasy plays around with is that goblins cannot call Waaaghs. The one exception that ever existed being Grom the Paunch. Skarsnik did not have the Waaagh rule in tabletop, and like it basically goes out of its way to say, like, Skarsnik has not earned the right or the ability to call a Waaagh yet, but in the end times he's building up to his Waaagh. So you could play around with, maybe there was like a Night Goblin Shaman that did acquire the power to do a Waaagh, and he did it through like maybe the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms and created a sort of hive mind among Night Goblins, which would be absolutely terrifying if that was successful. There are ways you can play around with this, but it's not something that exists casually with them. For Slaanesh could do something like a hive mind, I think, if you wanted to. It's a bit of a stretch, but it could be done, of a Slaanesh imposing its will on various different creatures. Like, we kind of see this where the Slaanesh can possess the bodies of different creatures and force them to do things. You have things like the Skink Priest can train themselves to allow a Slaanesh to enter their mind and it not like completely destroy them. Lord Croak is shown in the lore as possessing bodies, notably of his oracle Tinslati. So there are ways you can play around with it, but it would be some playing around. Hi Andy, hi Lindsay. I hope y'all are doing okay. We love y'all. We love y'all lots. Wish you were here. But I hope y'all are doing all right. We're just hanging out and rambling. Good to see you both. Ryan, me angry. No new old world stuff. What do? It's coming. They've shown off the rumor engine that's got the new Chaos Knights in it. I am 99.99999% sure. So it's coming. But we're really waiting for we gotta wait for 40K to really wrap up. 40K is still kind of in their release cycle for 11th edition. So we've got to wait for it to sort of pass. And then we will and then it'll be finally time for AOS Old World stuff. Also, I love living the future, being able to post live from a trade. It is nice. It do be nice. Pumpkin King Jack, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Jope Chan, hello Ryan, I graduated from college and published a book. What the hell? Damn, congrats. Super big congrats. That's crazy. I have done neither of those things. So huge congrats to you. I want to thank both you and Andy for introducing me to Warhammer Fantasy. Well, thank you for being here and being part of our community and everything. We really, really appreciate it. Man, speaking of community stuff, I'll tell you what. So we have a Age of Sigmar league here for Lorebeards. If you're ever interested in learning to play Age of Sigmar, it's pretty casual, but it's kind of just a nice time. I'm actually planning to make some time. I'm hoping either today or tomorrow to write some lore for my guys. Man, I got whooped yesterday. I got absolutely beaten to death. But it was actually a really close game, despite like the second I saw what I was going to be fighting, I was like, oh boy, oh boy, I am in danger. It's just funny. Bonfoot, back to the garlic topic. Alkali soil or acidic? You wouldn't want acidic oil, I think, for garlic. I believe you want the garlic to you want the soil to be like as rich as possible. Which I think acidic tends to lean against a bit. I don't know. I don't plant that often. Pumpkin King Jack, the sleeper and that massive city in the chaos waste always felt like they were connected in my head, but that's a good distance in between. Well, sorry, I haven't eaten today, so I'm very hungry. Normally, this is that really convenient point where I can mute myself and eat. And Andy would reliably yap for like 5 minutes. But he's not here, so I have to have these like awkward silences. So, Pumpkin King Jack, in answer to your question, you are likely onto something, because the thing you have to remember about the sleeper is that she was not the only one of her species. Her species was noted to control a vast empire that stretched across mountains. And it's very, very likely that the mountains being referred to are the World's Edge Mountains, and that her kingdom, though I think she, I'm trying to remember what city they were. Where does that take place? The Sleeper Warhammer. It's not in Zufbar, right? Trying to remember where the story takes place. Oh, it's Karakirn. So, I mean, considering that she was found in Karakirn, it could be that the Gray and Black Mountains is where the Sleeper was native to. But it could be maybe they dominated the entirety of the mountains. Maybe like they controlled a significant amount of the mountain chains. They might have controlled those mountains, and then maybe some spots in the middle mountains, and then up into the Norskin mountains. It could have been that they controlled just that natural connected chain of Gray, Black, the vaults up into the World's Edge Mountains, all the way up to the Chaos Wastes. Anything's possible. We don't know. Obviously, that's the only book the Sleeper and her species is ever mentioned in. So there's not a great wealth. There's not like a great treasure trove of information. But if you wanted to have it in your mind that the way they were able to establish contact with that they knew well of the Chaos Gods enough to cry out to them when the dwarfs were exterminating them, so that the last one she was able to form that pact with the Dark Gods. You could make the argument that they stretched all the way up to the Chaos Space. And that, I don't think that would be that big of a stretch. It'd be a little bit of a stretch, but it wouldn't be a huge stretch. Grim Isaac, what if Ushoran died? What didn't die? That's the I love the cancel sign plus dagger, but was buried and came back. So it's worth noting that even if Ushoran died, that doesn't mean he's dead forever. Dying for a vampire, remember, dying for a vampire is like super easy, barely an inconvenience. It is not that big of a deal for a vampire to die. They could be resurrected so easily to the point it's almost comical. The biggest problem with Ushoran's death is that he was killed in the midst of a giant invasion into a city that was being overwhelmed by greenskins. This like uncountable horde of savage orcs. And as the savage orcs washed over it, nobody knows what happened to him. Like, they're like, okay, he got hit by like a super big spell, and it's believed that he died. And if he did die, nobody knows where his body is. Because he was either vaporized or the greenskins maybe ripped him to pieces as a trophy and took trophies from his body, or maybe he just got trampled under thousands of feet deep into the earth, or a building collapsed on top of him, or who knows. This question has actually technically been answered in that if you buy the what omnibus is that? I think it's Undeath Ascendant. Pretty sure it's Undeath Ascendant, but in the I am sure. If you buy the Undeath Ascendant army Black Library book, which was part of the Warhammer Legends series, one of the stories in it is a story about the return of Ushoran. And in that story, basically what happens is that Ushoran was horribly wounded during the invasion of Morkane, but he doesn't die. He's crippled, and he's hit so badly that he basically loses all of his memories. Like he just doesn't remember who he is. So the book follows a series of events mostly revolving around the Strigony. And it's an old book. It's from like the older lore, so most people that you would discuss with it would probably not consider it to be canon, because the end of the book literally has Ushoran murdering the Elector Count of Averland, which he's unnamed. He's just the Elector Count. Like, he's never given a name. But if you were to consider it into like the modern canon, it would have been him murdering Marius Lightdorf, who obviously died at the Third Battle of Blackfire Pass. Unless you're saying that maybe it was the Elector Counts that came before Marius, but the story seems like it's supposed to take place during the era of Karl Franz. So then you could say, oh, maybe it takes place with the guy that's after Marius, but it's kind of a mess. But Ushoran coming back would not be that crazy or difficult. You would just have to have a story about someone that goes and finds him. And he could still be alive. Like, it could be that he's just a crazed ghoul creature, like a really big, scary ghoul creature. But it could be that he's basically just a monstrous super ghoul that's hiding out in the Marshes of Madness or in the ruins of Morkane. And someone's just gonna like track him down and fix him, essentially. Which would probably be super fucking difficult. It would actually be easier to bring him back if he was dead than if he was alive, to be honest. Because if he was alive, it would mean that he is not in good condition. So yeah, hopefully that helps. How do Black Orcs replenish their numbers? The same way all greenskins do, spores. When they die, when they travel around, their bodies release spores, and when they die, their bodies release spores. Spores likely mostly come from. We don't get a lot of super great information about greenskin reproduction in fantasy. We kind of have to take it all from 40k, and even in 40k, it's not as deeply delved into as a lot of us would like. So it has something to do with spores. My personal interpretation has always been that greenskins release a massive amount of spores with their dung. So when they defecate and also when they die, their bodies like naturally produce spores that feed off like the nutrients of their corpse. And the spores like work themselves down into the soil and into like caverns and networks or space below the ground. Where then they're able to like mature and turn into greenskins. But they reproduce the same way that all other orcs do. Gaming Protect. Hello, Sotek. I wanted to ask what are your thoughts on the Centaur? What else AOS revealed a while ago, and how could they exist in fantasy? So you're talking about the Khanate. I love the Khanate. I want the Khanate to be real. They are real, but I want them to have their own faction. Whether they're a separate book or they're just part of a Sylvaneth book, I want them so badly. They're so fucking cool. They're not just centaurs though. We've seen a satyr version as well. So there's the centaur Khanate, which have like the upper body of an elf and the lower body of a beast, but they've got 4 legs. And then there's a satyr version, which has the upper body of an elf and the lower body of a beast, but it's 2 legs. I could you have them in fantasy? Yes, you could, but it would definitely be a big old stretch. But it could, because that's what Orion literally is. If you look at Orion, he is a Khanate. He's basically the template for their entire faction. So what you could do is that you could, if you wanted to, you could fudge the storytelling a little bit and make it where perhaps if a wood elf is a wild rider for too long, not too long, but like too long implies that there's a safe amount of time to be a wild rider. But like if they become a wild rider and they are a wild rider for long enough, that perhaps they evolve essentially into a Khanate. Like they mutate, which they technically already do mutate because they have like green flesh and they lose aspects of their individuality and they kind of evolve to look like Orion. But you could have it where like they mutate much further and they get various beast-like qualities. So they become centauroids or satyrs or other creatures, but they're like a wholesome form of the primal animalistic aspects of Athel Loren instead of the forest spirit leaning aspects of Athel Loren. That could be a way to play it. Gary Garadison. What's the difference between fantasy and sci-fi? That's a good question. I honestly do not think there is a super easy line necessarily to draw between the two. I think sci-fi tends to focus on different topics than fantasy does. But what I will say is this: in my personal mind, the moment people start using like a gun that is more start using lots of guns casually that are more sophisticated than well, it's funny because it's when I think about it, it's kind of funny because there's also kind of like a weird middle space where if you have like modern tech, it's not sci-fi really, but it's also not fantasy. I think in most people's views, even if it's like fictional, they'd be like, eh. For me, it comes down to the tech level. Like generally speaking, how you get projectile from spot A to spot B is going to determine a lot of the theming. And also I think the idea that people will often turn to is if the magic in your setting is actually magic or is it science, in the sense that are you trying to take real world concepts and just say, oh, I'm using things that exist in reality, but I'm evolving them to such an extent that they might as well be magic? Or am I using something that is utterly, from its base concept, is utterly impossible in the real world, therefore it's utterly magic? Those are probably the things I would turn to. But I mean, the more I read, the more I feel like the separation is fuzzy. And it gets fuzzier. Because like Star Wars is in many ways, more of a fantasy story than it is like a sci-fi story. If it wasn't for like the spaceships, it would probably feel more at home in fantasy than it does in sci-fi. Like theming would probably be the biggest thing to point to. But that is more of a question, I think, for like writers than just dumb little old me, I think. Possibly. Jonathan King, I'm under the headcanon that most of the species that lived on the Warhammer world before the old ones had at least an encounter with the dark gods, such as the Famir and the Dragon Ogres, so they had an N when the time came. I don't think that's much of a headcanon. I think the lore actively supports that. We have canonical written lore that the Famir and the Dragon Ogres were already in contact with the Dark Gods before the Cataclysm. So before Chaos supposedly burst into existence, it had already been whispering into the Warhammer Fantasy world to acquire followers and worshippers and was making deals. So I would very heavily suggest that that's not really headcanon. That's more just kind of canon. When Chaos like burst onto the scene, it already had allies immediately from like the millisecond it dropped into the war started. It wasn't like it showed up and then it had to like convince various factions to join it. There were some late joiners. But me and Andy, I think, actually talked about this significantly. If you go watch our the Lorebeards episode on the Famir, or you watch the Lorebeards episode on the Dragon Ogres, for both of those episodes, we talk about this in depth. But I would say that's just flat out canon, and it suggests interesting things about the Dark Gods, because it means that the Dark Gods were not born alleged. They could have also simultaneously been born at that moment while simultaneously have not been, because the warp works in really weird ways and time doesn't move in a straight line. But you could have other stuff going on. Loreful Natural, why do the Dark Gods even bother making deals? It sees that chaos corruption is strong enough to passively turn most mortals to their cause without the need to offer anything in return. The reason is that the gods only can have so much influence on the world. And the thing you have to remember is that the way chaos corrupts generally is through influence. And sometimes chaos is able to influence through physical corruption, which means that it likely does not need to bother like making a deal per se. But there are various individuals, especially from species that are significantly more resistant to the influence of chaos or mutation, that do not. The only way chaos can really get them to fall is through corrupting their will, by making bargains with them, making deals with them. I mean, even when you're talking about chaos corruption turning people, one of the major arguments in Warhammer Fantasy, expressly through the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game, and you'll actually see this in a lot of Black Library novels as well, one of the greatest questions, one of the great philosophical debates of Warhammer Fantasy is, are mutants inherently evil? Are mutants inherently fall into chaos? Or are they simply humans that have mutated physically, but otherwise they are free of chaos? Like, maybe they are more prone to falling to chaos because they have like a notable form of chaos corruption in them. But there is significant evidence to suggest that it has more to do with culture and societal pressures than it does with spiritual ones. Where if it wasn't for the fact that being a mutant means that your neighbors are going to kill you, or that the local witch hunter is going to torture you and burn you alive in front of your community and might kill your friends and family just to be safe, or that the local priest who has been a spiritual guide and personal mentor to you your entire life is suddenly decrying you for being weak-willed and a monster and fallen. So there's all these discussions within the setting about, can chaos corrupt someone against their will? And there are times where the answer is just flat out yes. Like there have been people that are so lambasted with like just raw chaos that they just evolve out of control and they go absolutely mad and turn to a chaos spawn. But I think this is one of those things where chaos is, in many ways, I think and I think this is one of the core tragedies of the setting, is that chaos is simultaneously far more powerful than we can imagine, while also far weaker than we imagine. That it relies on the weaknesses of the intelligent species and takes advantage of those weaknesses to tempt and lure you into falling. But the thing with chaos is that I think there is a line in the sand where when you edge over that line, even if it's for good intentions or natural inclination, or you just made an honest mistake. Once you get over that line, they've got you. But it's one of the great philosophies of the setting. But to answer your question, most of the information that I would see, that I've seen and read for Warhammer Fantasy, suggests that just because you have the taint of chaos in you does not mean you belong to chaos. That there are many mutants or people that are being influenced by chaos who have the ability and choose to fight against it and resist it. And so chaos still needs them on side. If its ultimate goal is to destroy all of reality, which it is, and that's a very big ask. That's a hefty bar to get over. Chaos wants as many soldiers as possible. And plus, chaos, you have to remember that chaos is like a cancer. It is a gluttonous, ravenous, envious cancer that wants everything. One of the interesting things that you see in the lore is that there is a notable evolution from like older lore into, say, like 7th edition, 6th edition, 7th edition, where the phrasing starts to change a bit from chaos wants to destroy the world by just like completely wiping it out, to instead chaos wants it, wants to make it a part of itself, which is kind of more of the cancer type illusion, but from sort of like a metaphysical, like, Cthulhu-esque elder god that wants to make all of reality a part of it, which causes reality to break down. Like the ocean wanting cotton candy, but when it grabs cotton candy, the cotton candy melts. It's like, oh no! But which is a really weird analogy. I was thinking of the raccoon, but then I was like, that doesn't make sense because whatever. Anyway, yeah, all of that makes sense. Are we going to get an episode ever on the Gods of Law? I would love to do an episode on the Gods of Law. That seems very likely at some point. A lot of the Gods of Law is very, very old hammer. Sulkin has gotten some fairly recent updates, which has been nice. Sulkin is still relatively modern. But yeah, I'd love to do an episode of Gods of Law. When we do the Talea episode, actually, when we do the Talea episode, which hopefully will be next week, depending on how things are going with AD situation, and also hopefully I'm not exploding for some reason. The Gods of Law will come up because the Gods of Law are a significant influence in Talea. So they will come up. Bad thing about all these talking streams, I get a runny nose when I talk too much. Singemeister. AOS subfaction ideas. Hell yeah. Give me my Gundam faction, but all the Gundams are like they peak out at like 6 feet tall. Or like no, probably more like 12 feet tall. But all the Gundams are piloted by Satellites, and they're just like ramshackle piles of trash, but they function. That would be amazing. Giri Garana's an AOS idea. Wardens and guns hanging from a garget. Wrist-mounted cannon, steam catapult, exoskeleton, crown of command. Go right. I said right! Giri Garana said this is basically just this is literally, as far as I'm concerned, just a cog fort that you have kit bashed around a giant. Like, that's literally what that is. It's you take the bits from a cog fort model and you attach them all to a mega gargant model and put a bunch of dwarf on it. And there you go. You've done it. Do jellyfish have memories? I don't think they have, like, I think they have associations. I don't know if I go so far as to say they have memories. How would I add Groot to Warhammer Fantasy? I wouldn't add Groot. But if you had a gun to my head and said, "Shut up, Sotek, add Groot," I would make them. I would probably make them akin to a type of unique beastman, but I wouldn't associate them necessarily with the beastman. But what I would probably do with them is I would have them probably be a species that is native to the the western jungles of Lustria. So, like the Headhunters jungle, but on the west side of the Spinosotic Mountains. And basically, what they are is they are a species of creature that got heavily affected and evolved by the Slawn tampering with the magics of Lustria. Because one of the things that the Slawn did in order to make Lustria capable of defending itself was that they used magic to influence the evolution of Lustria to turn it into a hellhole. Which is why all the flora and fauna are like terrifying in Lystria and are capable of like wiping out entire armies casually and killing demons. Like greater demons can get killed by the native things of Lystria. And I would make it where the crude are basically one of those species that got that due to a quirk got so heavily evolved that they have turned into this hyper evolution species that whatever they consume becomes a part of them. Has his mic qualities gotten spider since he sneezed? I don't know what's going on with mic stuff, apparently. I'm hoping it's just StreamYard's being weird and not my actual microphone being weird. I'll have to do another test later today. Grim Isaac, what if the gods of law are Myrmidia's angels / demons? It's an argument you could make if you really wanted to, that the gods of law are divine servants of Myrmidia. It'd be a bit weird, in my opinion. I don't generally tend to be a huge fan of the philosophy of like fairly major gods, major powers being the divine servants of other major powers. Because I think that makes the world kind of a smaller, more boring place. I would rather have the gods of law be their own unique thing. But you could do this if you wanted to. It wouldn't be that big of a stretch, and it could go part of the way to explain why they are so localized. That being said, they don't fit in with Myrmidia that well necessarily. Like Solkin, Myrmidia would not like Sulkin that much. Sulkin is a very uniquely cruel. He's odd. Sulkin and Myrmidia would, I don't think they would get along particularly well. Arianka could have a better relationship with Myrmidia, but Arianka's also got like the whole she's like, oh, she's sealed away business. And then oh god, I can't remember the other two. There's two more gods of law. But I always struggle to remember their names because they're very insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Just because they don't get used. Sir Panza, what if Belshazzar had a blinky? Maybe he did. Who are we to judge? Who are we to judge? Nils Andre, Famir make a deal with chaos and damn all later Famir. A human makes a chaos deal, but the children are not automatically damned. Why? The argument here, well, okay, so funny enough, Nils Andre, we don't know that that's not necessarily the case, right? Like, what if it turns out the reason humans are so prone to mutation and the reason that humans are so easy to corrupt for chaos is because one of their ancestors made a bargain. We don't know. But what I would say is that's likely not the case. Why would the Famir situation be unique? The argument could be that the Famir, you have to remember the Famir are not an old one species. They are neither were the Dragon Ogres. Most of the species that made a bargain with the Dark Gods and damned all of their race were a precursor species that were near extinction. They were almost wiped out. And it seems that they basically got together with like the primordial mothers or primordial fathers of their species, and they bargained on behalf of their species with the gods, but it was like a council type situation. Because you have to remember, Krakenrock the Black didn't just like go down a dark alley and meet with the Chaos Gods and like exchange some weed and was like, oh, hey, we're all corrupt now. There was like a great meeting between the Shaggots and the gods because we know Kolek Suneater was there and his part in the bargain was so blasphemous that the sun will not look upon him, yada yada. So I would say that it seems that I would argue the biggest thing is that it would seem that in order to damn the whole species, you have to have an ancestor there who is likely connected to every single living member of the species. So it could be that once with how few of them survived the wars against the old ones and the wars against the old ones' creations and the wars, the ancient wars against like the dragons and such, that the Famir and the Dragon Ogres, there were so few of them left that the ones that were at that meeting were literally the ancestors of every single living member of the species. But it could be that when the old ones created humanity, maybe there's something, or when the old ones created species, maybe the way they created them, there was some sort of kind of resistance that made it where you're not damning your entire line. Or maybe it's just that humans are hilariously goof about like they don't tend to bargain their lines for whatever reason. Maybe humans are just bad at deals. Oh, a blicky is a gun. Ah, if Belshazzar had a gun, I'm sure Belshazzar in his own way had things that were far more fucking terrifying than just a gun. If he had a gun, though, it would be good. I'm sure he was buried with it, as he would have wanted. That way, if anyone ever tries to tomb rob him, he just screams. He just the second a tomb robber opens his tomb, they just hear a voice scream "Castle Doctrine," and that's the last thing they hear. Todd, working on some end homebrew. What would you add? I would definitely add more species of beastmen-like creatures. So like I would really want to have something to do with like elephant men, but I would also want elephant cavalry. I would want to have the best of both worlds. So I would want like humans that ride on regular elephants because we are lacking in the regular elephant cavalry of Warhammer. Though arguably you could make that um an Araby thing instead of an end thing, and instead have end just have like elephant men, maybe four-armed elephant men. Um but the biggest thing that I would do, Todd, is I would take a good amount of time to sit down and study the. I would want to sit down and study a lot of the art and mythos of Indian mythology, um, and then localized to India Buddhist and Hindu mythology. Because they have a lot of really, really exciting and cool entities and creatures and stuff that you could be used to inspire different types of troops and characters and monsters and creatures. But you also want to be careful that you're Warhammer-ifying them and not just taking them one to one unless they're appropriate for that. Because like if it's like a mythical story or it's a mythical creature and it's like, oh, this is a notable creature that served as a war creature and it represents like a fairly, let's say, casual mythological concept and not like a really culturally significant um deeply important spiritual concept. Those you know like Sun Wukong, the Monkey King is something I think you can one for one, right? Like Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, like you make your alterations to make sure that the Monkey King fits your setting, but anybody can use the Monkey King and nobody's going to care. Nobody gives a shit. Like nobody is that emotionally attached to the Monkey King, and if they see your interpretation of the Monkey King, they're going to be like, "Oh, how dare you!" So you just want to make sure that the stuff that you're using um, is not gonna get you in trouble. Skylar Martin, where do demons of chaos undivided come from? I understand that undivided humans are blessed because the big four. No. So chaos undivided does not mean that the big four like you. Often it means kind of the opposite. Chaos is not just the big four. There are thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of entities within the realm of chaos or the ether that are on the side of chaos but are not the big four. And many of them are what we would consider gods. They're not as big and bad as the big four necessarily, but they are, some of them are far more powerful than any greater demon. Some of them are weaker than greater demons, but they have their own unique spheres of influence within the world. Generally, when you are dealing with Chaos Undivided, you are humans, you are dealing with people who either do not dedicate themselves to, you're dealing with the vast majority of chaos worshippers when you're dealing with Chaos Undivided, because most people know that deal with chaos either don't know enough about chaos that they can't differentiate the various powers, and they just sort of worship their own understanding of what chaos is, which might not include the four. It might include like a local demon or a local god that represents, that is perhaps aligned with chaos, but represents its own core identity and concepts. It might be like a local demon of like a local river or a local forest or a local shrine or a local mountain or a hill or a chasm or whatever. So it could be like a nature spirit that is fallen to chaos. It could be a demon that represent, or it could be a god that's quite powerful but represents a rather bizarre concept. So you have gods like Zuvacin. You have gods like Nakoho, who are very, very powerful and are chaos gods, but are not the big four. And they often fight against or alongside the big four, just depending on the situation. But one of the big things in Warhammer is fantasy, is that dedicating yourself to a singular power is more something you do if you are very powerful, or more likely you are fucking crazy. Because most people that understand the chaos powers in Warhammer know that the dark gods are jealous. They are jealous, easily provoked, spiteful assholes. And if you dedicate yourself to one power, you have just made enemies out of the other three powers at minimum. So most people that follow chaos do so out of desperation. It's their natural culture or survivability. And if they are in those categories, generally speaking, one of the big reasons they follow chaos is because they don't want to die. And they're trying not to draw attention to themselves. They're just trying to live their lives. And if you're trying to just live your life and you're trying to just make the gods not notice you and just appease them, then the path you should walk is the path of Chaos Undivided. Because the second you pick one, you pissed all the other ones off. As for what are demons Undivided, some of them are going to be the demons of other notable powers, like Zuvacin, for instance. Others might be a demon prince, so a mortal soul that ascended to godhood, essentially. They might not be a very big god, but they're functionally a god, because they're someone that just acquired enough power, enough magic, that they ascended into the ether and became a creature of the ether, but they're not associated with any god. In which case, they are their own major power, and they might have their own pieces of themselves that have broken off within the ether, or creatures they have brought under their sway, or noble components of magic, or former servants of theirs that they have elevated themselves, or that they have forcibly transformed into something in their own image. They could just be random scraps of the ether itself they manifest. There are many types of creatures that are just sort of spat out of the chaos gates on the north and south pole, where there's so much turmoil and magic and insanity going on that the gates will just vomit out these strange entities that are demons, but they're not associated with anything or anyone. They're just sort of these reckless scraps of nonsense. And those would be undivided demons. Oh, excuse me. Like one of the most common demons, actually, like if you're just wandering around the chaos space, one of the most common demons to see is a chaos undivided fury. And a fury is just this little scrap of like ether that is infused with some particularly charged emotion or concept or piece of soul or who knows what, that just basically got kind of like flicked out of the realm of chaos, but it stayed somewhere where there's enough magic where it can maintain a physical form. And it's just this ravenous predatory creature that has a very bestial intellect. It doesn't have any complex schemes, any grand designs. It's just sort of this like wandering, um, hungry thing that will attack and devour pretty much anything it sees on sight. So you just kind of have that sort of stuff. Friend or trader, Sotek, I noticed something. Skink Berserkers have a red crest and Slayers have red crests. Any possible connection you'd make? I mean, realistically, the connection I would probably make is that red is an aggressive color. That's probably as far as that goes. However, if you wanted, I think this is one of those things where genuinely I would make the argument that you have probably a more interesting story by suggesting that it's not a connection, it's just a coincidence. However, there are individuals within the Warhammer world that believe it is not just a coincidence, even though it is. Like, imagine a skink priest of Sotek that is obsessed with dwarf slayers because it is under a misunderstanding and thinks that these dwarfs have somehow heard the spirit of Sotek, or they are spawnings of Sotek, or they somehow represent some significant calling of the serpent god, when they're just dwarf slayers out on an adventure in Lustria of the Southlands. And like, you have this almost like ridiculous story of this skink like trying to make contact with them because he believes that like they're lost children of Sotek, and they are like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? But maybe there could be a deeper connection. Maybe it could be that Sotek is like this, Sotek is this divine avenger, this great predator against the forces of chaos, and it has its own way of influencing other matters in the world. I don't know. You could play around with it if you want. Sagemeister, who are the trickster and the other trickster? Oh, from like the trickster shard and such. Generally speaking, it's never directly stated. I believe sometimes it's implied to be Zinch, sometimes it's implied to be Loek, sometimes it's implied to be Ronald, sometimes it's implied to be a completely unique deity that is just simply known as the trickster. Usually, when you're dealing with the common items, which is what the trickster shard and the other trickster shard is from, which, to be clear, the trickster and the other trickster shard, they're the same trickster, allegedly. But when you're dealing with the common items, they actually have kind of a funny lore note on the common items, where they say something to the effect of, when you're dealing with a common item and you have a character that takes a common item, that item is a general representation, but you would translate it into that group's culture. So like, if you had somebody with the trickster shard and they're like a lizard man, you would translate it to, that shard was created by the equivalent of the trickster entity or the trickster god of that culture. So you would find like the nearest translation, so to speak, is generally how they pitch the common magic items. Dolly Forever, I wonder why is the most prominent mutation among Chaos Dwarfs is tusks. The only other humanoid with tusks are orcs. Is it a sign to show how wrong/different, or maybe they share ancestry? And okay, I think I was with you until I got to literally the last word. I would suggest it has nothing to do with ancestry. I would suggest that the tusk mutation for the Chaos Dwarfs has probably more to do with Hachet's expression of like aggression, dominance, and greed. In that tusks are often, I would suggest that perhaps to Hachet's mind, tusks are a expression of like incredible belligerence, dominance, and strength, which is also in many ways what they represent in greenskins. It is a sign of strength and might to have the largest, most powerful tusks, or the biggest tusk that you'll find among the orcs. And that I think they might represent similar concepts. And there could be something that Hachette in some ways is influenced by greenskins, in the sense that if you think of Hachette to the greenskins, or Hachette to the Chaos Dwarfs, or the Dawi general, represents a perversion of all that dwarfs are, then, and Hachette is one of their gods who has been with them fighting against greenskins since the very beginning, that maybe Hachette, in his own perverted way of changing the dwarfs, makes them more greenskin-like in order to make them more aggressive and belligerent and powerful. Hence, tusks. But that's just a potential way that could be interpreted. Bunston, say there was a group of beastmen that viewed their bargain with the chaos as a crap deal and wanted to break away. Where could they look for allies? The most likely groups would probably be the Cult of Tal in the old world. I think most elves are possessed of such an obscene level of hubris and aggression towards beastmen that they would never give them the chance. They would just kill them. Humanity, though, I think humanity, as both a strength and a weakness, depending on the situation, has one of the greatest and deepest levels of empathy. The other potential ally they might find, based on what we've seen, might end up being the Dragons of Cathay, where we have things where, like, the Celestial Dragon Emperor has supposedly purified the chaos taint out of the Celestial Alliance. And the dragons seem willing to take in other species depending on certain circumstances. So maybe they could find an ally with the dragon of the Amber Wind, the Wind of Beasts, in Yin Yin. Or perhaps they could find allies that they are able to communicate with among the humans' Cult of Tal, are some ideas. Marcus are is it Marcus Marcus Reyes? I want to say it's Marcus Reyes. I want to say. I gave one of my players in a Manon campaign a magic shape-changing albatross sword. Is giving them an elven form as well fitting? A magic shape-changing sword is giving them an elven form as well fitting. Are you saying the sword? Are you asking if the sword could turn into an elf? So you don't have to use a super chat. You could just put a normal comment. Just normal comment. You don't have to don't waste your money. Give me, I don't understand. Give me more information here. Elaborate. Cruz do you need a bribe for Lisbon City Part 2? I know the map is lost. The map is not fully lost. There was someone that was lovely and nice enough to basically help us recreate it in all the points that matter. So I would say we want to do it at some point. The biggest issue is just that it requires a lot of genuine work from Andy. It's one of those things. Don't do it right now, obviously, because he's dealing with a really unfortunate crisis at the moment. But once the current situation has settled, I am not kidding you when I say that Andy, when life is running normally, Andy does like a Q&A every Saturday before the Rookery over on the Lawhammer channel. You need to go to that stream and you need to bug him about it every single time. Like just go on there and be like, Andy, do the Laquaddle stream. Andy, do the Laquaddle stream. Andy, do the, like, you got like, because it otherwise, like, it's, yeah, like we've had a relative recreation of the map But Andy would still need to go in and like edit that recreation if we even still have it. I don't even remember if we still have it. And then we would be in a place where we could do it, because then all I'd have to do is sit down and rewatch the stream just to refresh myself on everything. I would like to finish Laquaddle. I would love to finish Laquaddle. But yeah, that's going to require Andy to be like like in the zone. Joe Numbers could be a fun idea. Monkey King versus Sun Wukong, brother demigods who compete to show up the other. One goes to In, one goes to Cathay. That would be kind of an unexpected. That would be a very unexpected trick, in my opinion. Would be if there was actually two of them, like there were twins. That would be. I don't know if I would like that or hate that. I have no idea. It would just kind of depend, I think, overall on how they wrote it. That has potential to be super interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That could work. I think that's one of those things that would play around very, very well in a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay scenario. Because it's very likely, based on his position in the Mountains of Heaven, that the Monkey King is going to be a significant figure in both Ind and Cathay. What's cracking my peppers behind the bastards? I've never watched that. I don't know what that is. Build a Black Ark stream? I think that would be super fun. We could absolutely build a Black Ark. I don't know when we do that, but we could absolutely do that. The build of something streams, those are super fun. We could absolutely do that. Build a Black Ark could be super fun, because that would not require. Generally, I try to avoid requiring Andy to have to like be drawing, because it's so much extra work that I just feel bad for throwing on him. But we would not need that for Build a Black Ark, because we could just talk story and we could just talk history and general structure, kind of like how we did with the Spine of Sotek one. All right, my dudes. Oh, I still need that clarification from Marcus. Marcus, are you here? If you're not here, I'm going to just try to answer it as best I can. And then I got to go. Okay, I'm going to try to answer this. So you gave them a magic shape-changing sword, and you said albatross in parentheses around shape-changing. Does that mean the sword can turn into an albatross? Like, can it transform into a bird, and then it just pretends to be a bird, and then like your player's like sword form, and it turns into a sword, and he's like, I got a sword now. If that is the case, that would be fine. Like, could it turn into an elf? Yeah, sure. There are magical artifacts that can appear as things. That would not be that crazy. It'd be kind of crazy, but it wouldn't be like impossible. That there would be now it would be a tremendously powerful weapon. I will say that would be a immensely powerful magic weapon. And it should definitely have notable sinister downsides that are not readily obvious. Like, if you're dealing with a weapon that has the ability to take on the form, sorry, terrible advice, terrible service. I gave my players a sword that originally was an albatross that took the party to the original owner. The players are unaware the sword is the bird. Very cool. Okay, I like that. That's really cool. So, could it take on the form of an elf? Yes. Yes, it can. That is, now, I will say, that is an incredibly powerful magic weapon that is sentient and able to take on the forms of other creatures. It's really probably less of a sword and more just a full-on etheric entity at this point. But it should be noted that etheric entities are noted very commonly to take on the forms of elves. We see that a lot with like the naiads and the oceanids. We also see that with several various like gods that when they take on a humanoid form, they appear in the form of elves. We dryads take on elven forms. So this sword basically being an incredibly powerful, like it could have been forged, but it's functionally an etheric entity. Want to say once it's revealed to get the sword form to communicate. Yeah, it could do that. It could do that. But what I would suggest is that if it's an actual magic item, like if it was made by someone, if it was physically created, something with that much magic in it, you should give it some very, very dangerous aspects, because that is so much power put into a singular item that there are going to be deeply dangerous, sinister undertones. If it's just an etheric entity, like if you're saying like it's a son of Manon, so like it's functionally like a really, really powerful oceanid or naiad, well, it'd be an oceanid in this case. But if it's like just a very powerful ocean spirit, which could work super duper well, yeah, like it. Just keep in mind, you don't have to do this. This is merely a suggestion. But keep in mind that it is a spirit of the sea, so it should be just as capricious and bountiful, violent, and unpredictable, yet free-flowing, independent, and wild as the sea. It should have all of the best and worst aspects of the ocean. Keep in mind that Manon and Mathlan are, while they are seen as gods that are worshipped by civilizations, they are also seen as gods of destruction. And some people believe that worshiping them is in really, really bad taste because the ocean is cruel and merciless. But other people say that in spite of that, it is also free and giving and bountiful. And despite its greatest wrath, they love it. So just keep that in mind. I would recommend to make it a complex character. Walking Tree. Could a skilled ogre become a swordmaster of Hoeth? 99.9% of it, no, but sure. I would say that the answer is 99.99999% no. But there's a 0.0001% chance that a fairly miraculous series of events could occur that would result in a scenario where the very haughty arrogant speciesist high elves of Ulthuan would have an ogre who makes it to Lothern, and perhaps during like a chaos attack or a greenskin attack or a Skaven attack or a much more likely a dark elf attack, that ogre who is like he would have to probably at least be 100 years old, at least, but like a fairly, because ogres can live for a surprisingly long time. They can live for like several centuries. So having an ogre that's like 150, 200 years old and is a incredibly experienced swordsman and has a surprising amount of finesse and skill for an ogre, who demonstrates an incredible capability during this dark elf attack, could perhaps lead to a scenario where he like saves a bunch of elves from some dark elves and such, and they feel inclined to ask him to name a boon, and he asked to go to the big tower place where he can become like the greatest master swordsman. It would have to be an ogre that has a very unusual set of, like a very autistic ogre that is like very focused and obsessed with swordsmanship, to the point that like other ogres find him uncomfortable. He would have to probably be a very singular individual. But it's possible. It's possible. Joe Numbers, I know we asked y'all for a bunch, but genuinely more build streams would be great. Yeah, we could definitely do more build streams, because they're fun for us. We like them. We're trying to do them like once a month would probably be like the best, because we want to be careful with those kinds of streams, because we know a lot of people get really excited and are like, super chats, and we want to make sure I want to make sure that Lorebeards is respectful of y'all's we're respectful of y'all's interactions with us, and we're not like abusing the streams to try and like make people feel like we're trying to like squeeze them for all their super chats. So we try and have like a good variety, that way everyone's kind of getting something they're interested in, and like some of the streams are more kind of like these are the ones where people like to go crazy, and this one is a little more casual, whatever. But isn't that like the Ninja Ogre? Yeah, it's kind of like the Ninja Ogre. Yeah. If Andy can't be here Tuesday, will you still be here to do a little something that Andy planned last week? Yeah. What did Andy say he was thinking of doing on Tuesday if I wasn't here? Because I'll do something on Tuesday. And I am open to ideas. So if anyone's like, it's Sotek, he should do this, he would let y'all decide. Oh yeah, sure, we can do that. Fine with me. We'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll have more information by then, so we could talk about it then. All right, guys. I'm gonna bounce because I'm gonna go Smash Your Pass Part 2. Not on Lorebeards. not on Lorebeards. Sustainable farming practices, Sotek. Rotate your crops. And make sure to properly mix up your soil appropriately. I don't know. I don't do as much farming as I should. My nose is so stuffy from talking too much and not drinking enough water. All right. I'm gonna go celebrate Father's Day. I'm gonna go hang out with good old Papa Sotek. I'm gonna go hang out with the old man. So a would you date stream with all the characters? The answer is always yes. Even when it should be a no, it'll always be yes. All right. With that, I'm going to get out of here. Make sure if you're an American, I don't know if it's Father's Day in other countries. I just know it's Father's Day here in the States. But if you live in the States, don't forget it's Father's Day. Call your dad. Don't get in trouble. Also, tell him you love him if you have an amicable, good relationship. It's celebrate your ancestor gods day. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Before I go, let me double check who all is streaming right now, because I can send y'all off on a raid. Let's see. Stim Pack is streaming. My buddy Stim. My beloved Stim. So why don't we raid her? That'll be fun. So I'll send y'all off on a rado, and I hope you all have a lovely day. YouTube, I'll probably send y'all somewhere else because I don't think she's on YouTube. Any event, have a lovely day. Apologies again that Talea got delayed, but one of these days. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.